Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Well, hello. I, every Tuesday, look forward to seeing Mr. Dan Kent go for it fingers. That means we are ready to go, ready to welcome you. We are so glad that you are here. Welcome to the MuseCast. If you don't know, the MuseCast is just a little conversation that Dan and I have. Sometimes we have another guest, but it's really a continuing of the conversation from the previous Sunday sermon. And so it has been such a fun time of doing this show and engaging with the MuseCast audience and getting in questions and just more time to reflect on all that we are hearing and learning. And so that's just a bunch of words to say thanks for being here. And we are so glad that you guys tune in every week. I'm Shawna Boren. That is Dan Kent. And we are really looking forward to diving into Lamber's message. You guys have seen Lamber's here a few times on the MuseCast. And so this time we get to continue the conversation that he started on Sunday. But first, Dan, I have to know, so it is August 10th today. In case y'all didn't know, it's August 10th. That means that summer is kind of winding down, Dan. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, because you don't have like people that you've got to skirt off to school or anything, but summer is winding down. And so my question for you is, what is one thing you would love to accomplish or you're looking forward to doing before fall hits?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, we're going to be doing it. We're going, Barbara and I both, I think it's like, once you hear it once, it becomes like this need in your spirit and you have to hear it again. And so we are going up north to a friend's cabin on the lake so that we can hear loons at night.
Yes.
And there's something magical about that sound on a quiet lake and just hearing that kind of haunting cry of the loon. So that's what we're doing. How about you?
Well, the rest of this month, honestly, is all about number one child. Not number one in our hearts, but number one in the birth order. Okay. So, today is my eldest 18th birthday. And so, that's super exciting. And then next week, he's going camping up north with a bunch of high school friends before, he goes away to school, because he's going off to college. We don't camp. So I don't know what this boy is going to do up north in the woods. So y'all pray. And then the following week, we move him up north to school. And then the following week, the rest of our brood goes to school here at home. And so it is just relishing in all of the family time that we can and embracing those moments. And I love going up north. And so whenever we take him to school, I want to try to just take in the scenery, maybe help soothe my sorrow. So,
yeah. Well, what a big transitional time for him right now in his life. So it's huge. So all of you out there, family members, aunts, uncles, parents, friends, community members who are sending off a loved one for the first time away to school, I am praying for you, and I get it. And it's a mixed bag of excitement and you're gonna miss them and all of the good stuff. So yeah, that's what we do here. That's all right. Good. Yeah. Okay, so Lambers Fisher talked to us on Sunday about being married to God. Really quick caveat, like, we know that not everyone is married. Not everyone is in a loving marital relationship or partnership or covenant relationship. We know that, but this pertains, I believe, most of everything of what Lambert said can pertain to whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever your status is, because ultimately it's about that one-on-one relationship with our beautiful God. So I'm just setting you up there, Dan, for you to go up there and just swing a home run for us with the sermon. Well, first of all, the sermon, I particularly liked this sermon, and I think Lambers and I have a similar wavelength because, I did a year of PhD work in psychology. It was a PsyD program, so it was a doctorate in basically counseling, and so I think both of us kind of had a similar kind of motivation growing up. Like, okay, I know what dysfunction looks like. How do I find like healthy relationships and stuff like that? And so I think we probably have some similar motivations in our hearts. And so anytime you can marry theology and psychology, man, I'm all ears. So I love that. In fact, I also, after a year of doing PsyD work, I kind of came to the conclusion that not only are some of the kind of insights of psychology consistent with the scripture, but I felt like the scripture offered better solutions than secular psychology to a lot of relational dynamics. And so I ended up just saying, well, I'm going to go to the seminary. I ended up leaving my psychology program. But so that's an interesting thing that Lambers and I have in common. So Lambers, you're right. He talked about this. What does it look like if we were to consider our relationship with God like a marriage relationship? And so he just talked about kind of 4 lessons or 4 kind of frameworks to think about that through. And I thought it was really, really helpful. And again, he also offered the thing about, if you're single, this still applies to you. It doesn't mean that this doesn't apply to you or anything like that. But the 4 lessons, the first lesson is you need to think about fidelity. And fidelity is not simply faithfulness. It's not, he's not saying don't just avoid unfaithfulness. That's not healthy fidelity. Healthy fidelity is when you seek to draw near to the other person. It's just not, it's not only an absence of distance. It's more like that kind of hunger or that pursuit. And the second lesson is in fact that you pursue one another.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I'm breaking a cardinal rule. I'm interrupting the sermon. You're from the north, right? You're like from up here originally.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so we know I was born and raised in the South, but I got up here as soon as I could. Anyway, you say fidelity. I say fidelity. That's why
isn't that what I said?
Grinning. You said fidelity.
Oh, I don't know why.
I was wondering if I say it wrong because I'm like, no. I say fidelity.
I think I do both. I'll mix it up.
Great.
I mix it up. That's
Why not?
There's a lot of words. There's a lot of words that I do that with. Augustine.
Augustine.
That's what it is. Augustine and Augustine. I'll mix those up all the time because I don't know the right way to say it is. So I'll just,
You bet.
Let me just
say you could be completely right with fidelity and I'm wrong with fidelity. So, all right, continue.
I have no fidelity to either pronunciation. So let me just say that.
Perfect. I love it.
Okay. So the second lesson, by the way I have this set up, you're in the small box and I just barely saw your finger up raising your hand. So that was pretty funny. All right. So the second lesson is to pursue and if you're thinking about a marriage, you want to continue to pursue the partner and what and I see some of these marriages where it's like, okay, the people that get married and then that's it. That's the romance is over. They just got to that level of marriage and then they just kind of coast there. And so what Lambers is saying is that no, a really healthy relationship, just as it is in marriage, it's so too with God as you continue to pursue your relationship partner. And then the third lesson that he says is that in the same way with marriages where you try to meet one another's needs, so too in the same way that God meets a lot of our needs, God also invites us to meet some of his needs. And this was probably my favorite insight of the sermon. He kind of talked about, because I'm like, well, what does God need? God is omnipotent. God is all-knowing. God, breathed the universe. God can do whatever he wants. And I've always just assumed, well, God doesn't really need us. But he uses this really clever usage of Matthew 25, where Jesus is telling this parable of the sheep and the goats, and he says, the king will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick, and in prison, and you did not look after me. And they will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger needing clothes? And the king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these in my kingdom, you also did for me. And so I thought that was just a really clever way of showing how God is inviting us to meet God's own needs by serving one another. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth lesson is relationships. Healthy marriage relationships you should always seek to improve communication and listening and articulating your perspective and your needs better. And that's the same thing with God. And this is something is so hard with our relationship with God, because there is that sort of distance. There is that it's metaphysically different when we have a relationship with God. And so it's a great reminder to continue to listen and to learn how to listen and to have an open heart to God, and to also continue to pray and to continue to articulate our lives and our hearts and our spirits and our wants and all that kind of stuff to God as well. And so those are sort of the four lessons that Lambert set up. And I thought they were really great. I couldn't think of like an obvious thing that he missed in that. And right. And it's a very helpful way of thinking of our relationship with God. And it, I think, has a lot of really practical, I mean, there's so much practical wisdom in it that just impresses me. So what did you think of the sermon?
Yeah, I really appreciated and enjoyed the just the metaphor, the visual of, hey, coming and sitting on the couch, and God is inviting us. He's the spouse that is inviting us to come sit on the couch and to fine tune our relationship. I had never thought of my relationship with God in that way. I know that I am a part of the bride of Christ. I know that I am in covenant relationship with him. I know all of that. And I think that's beautiful, but just the very practical visual of taking time, sitting down, talking through fidelity with one another, meeting mutual needs for one another, communication, like all of it, that the 4 points that you just went through. I took time to go, wow, like, and so with God, like, yes, I want that for the relationships I have in my life, right? I want that with my husband, and I want those close, enriching, growing relationships with my children and with my family and friends and community, and so with God. And so just the, like I said, the visual, I think, was really helpful, very practical. I had not thought of it that way. And I will say it was a little like, you alluded to this, like to think that I could be meeting God's needs. And then if I reflect on if I've done that, that could get really scary and feel like a lot of pressure. But you also alluded to, and as did Lambert, is that the way in which we do that is by serving and loving others. Like when we do it to the least of these, we're doing it unto him. And so at one point I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm such a loser. I'm never going to be able to meet God's needs. But then on the other hand, it's like, no, wait, the way in which we do that is through these various means. And so I found it encouraging. I found it challenging. And just, a very practical, insightful way. And I don't know, like to take a sermon to say, hey, let's look at your relationship with God. How is that going? How is that covenant? How is that playing out in your life? And kind of doing like an inventory check. I thought was really cool. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of the reason why I really like, I really like the, I don't know if you call it an analogy or a metaphor or whatever, just a way of thinking of our relationship, is because you can see all these different relationships and marriages, even if you're not married, this still applies to you. I mean, you can look at other married relationships and you can see marriages that are working and marriages that aren't, and being a married person personally, and being in a marriage that I'm just so thrilled by, and I love my marriage. I love it, and it just makes me so happy when I see other marriages that are vibrant like that as well. But it also kind of you can also see when things aren't working. And a lot of times it's because of some of the things that Lambert said. And so I hope that going forward, people will continue to kind of collect data on these ideas as they get to know other couples or they meet married people, and just continue to grow in some of these lessons. I think that would be a really great thing.
Yeah, I personally, I benefited from looking at this through the very like real lens of my marriage. Like it was a good little, like, again, happily married, love my spouse. I feel like I'm just, I feel blessed. But even like thinking through the lens of my actual marriage, like, wow, like these are some good points to keep in mind and to look into, just, to make sure that things don't get off kilter. And at the same time, looking at it through the lens of my covenant with the Lord, and wow, these are some really good things to keep in mind and to pay attention to and make sure things don't get off kilter. And so I think it was really cool that we had like these two tracks that we could go down that were super applicable. And as I'm talking, I'm thinking through to something we were just saying about to the least of these, like whenever you fed or clothed, or, the passage you brought up in Matthew, that is one way in which we do meet the needs of God, by meeting and serving the needs of others. We got a question in kind of about that. Yeah. About I'm just paraphrasing, basically saying if we are doing something for someone else, not out of love for that person, but rather to show love to God, is that still a good kingdom thing? So I guess, like, if I were to go and serve others or feed the less fortunate or whatever I do, but it's not out of love for the other, but it's more so that I can say, this is how I'm loving you, God, by loving on this person. Is that still valid? And is that still kingdom? What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
It's a really good question, because you're basically saying, if I'm doing this just to do it, I don't really care about these people. Well, is that really, is that valid? If I'm just doing it because God told me so, or because it makes God happy, is that valid? And on one hand, I can see where you would say, well, no, it's not valid, because God wants us to have love for those people. But on the other hand, I would say that I think it's unavoidable. I mean, I think that if we were just left to, because what Jesus says, if you only love those who love you, or if you only love those, who you just love, I mean, how's that different than anybody else? And if you're only serving those who you love, or serving those who are like your own, then you're not doing anything different than anybody else. And of course, we're going to love people, or we're going to serve people that we love. And that's easy. The hard thing is serving people that you don't love. And that's sort of the whole point here, is that in those cases, you have to just, you do it. And what the Bible is saying is that even though you don't really have the feelings, you don't have the heart for them at this point, you are still meeting God's needs, and you are still doing a good thing in your relationship with God. Not to say that that's enough. Of course, God eventually wants us to have those feelings. But when you think of just about anything that's complicated, there's always this sort of like pretend phase where you don't have the feelings, you don't have the heart yet, but you do it anyway. And that's why, the Apostle Paul talks about, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Well, the word imitate there is, I'm just copying what they're doing. I don't actually have the heart and stuff there. I'm just mimicking the behaviors. And in the process of doing that, I think we open up space for those feelings to emerge, and for real connection with that person to emerge, and empathy to emerge. But I think for a lot of times, if we do things just out of our fidelity to God, or fidelity, depends on how you want to say it. I think that's good. And I think that's part of the path of eventually doing things because you love people. And I think all growth is like this, like even riding a bike. It's like, there's some point where you don't know how to ride a bike, and you just sort of have to pretend like you do, and you just start pedaling, and eventually you actually learn how to do it. I watching the Olympics, man, some of the things that these kids do on these BMX bikes, it's like no one knew how to do that. They eventually just, took a bike on a ramp, and all of a sudden they're in midair and they start doing things and seeing what happens, and they probably fall and break a leg, and then they get back up and do it again. And at some point they get familiar with everything and they're able to do it. And I think loving others and serving others is the same. There's this thing where I don't have the feelings for it, but I'm going to just do it and then see what feelings emerge from that. So it's a great question.
Yeah. And to piggyback on what you're saying, I have two thoughts that really coincide with what you've already said. But one, I wonder, and I think that this also circles back to something we talked about months ago, which was habitus, right? Like doing the little things that eventually become habit, that naturally become just a natural overflow of how you respond and act. And then those little things lead to bigger things. And so I think a lot of what we do for the kingdom doesn't always come naturally.
That's right.
It's because we paid attention to those little things and did them over, and sometimes did them begrudgingly, sometimes did them because we were supposed to, not because we wanted to. But I think through that process, our heart changes and we grow and develop. And so I do think that that's just, something Absolutely. That we've talked about before that matters.
Yeah, look at that. You're connecting this with something that we did a few weeks ago. That's next level analysis. I mean, stay right here for hard hitting reporting, folks.
There you go. We bring you the real. The second thing that I wanted to piggyback with what you shared in response to that question is that we're human. And I'm just going to be very honest. Love sometimes is a process. Even the people that are nearest and dearest to you, to us, to me, to whomever, sometimes the love wasn't instantaneous. Sometimes it was a process, and that is okay. So we're not striving for perfection out of the gate right away. Sometimes we have to grow in the love and the serving. And I just think that's important to keep in mind. And I wouldn't forsake loving and serving, even if it's not fully coming from the fullness of your heart. I wouldn't forsake it because you're still doing good, right? Like if you're serving people and you don't necessarily have a love for them, but you are meeting needs and do it, like that's still a good thing. And every good and perfect gift comes from above. And so I think it's just a way of putting kingdom stuff out there, even if you're doing it begrudgingly. I guarantee if you keep at it, your heart will begin to change and form into the kind of person that you want to be, who would freely give of that love and service.
I think you're tapping into something that's really, that I've found to be very true. And that is, like, I'm thinking about like some of my friendships, and a couple of my closest friends I didn't like at first. And like, and there's almost as if like there was like this junkyard or just this really hard travel or wavy water I had to row across in order to connect with them. But when I did, on the other side of that, it ended up being, a lot, because there's some people who are really easy to like, who I don't really have contact with anymore, that are not really in my life at all, even though, man, we clicked so good and they just didn't last. But boy, some of my lasting relationships were a lot of times the hardest at first. And that's also true, I've noticed, with music for me. Like my favorite musicians, like I remember like hearing them thinking, I just don't like that. But it grows on you and it gets in you, and then suddenly you like it. And other people come along and say, oh, I don't like that. And you're like, well, yeah, I didn't either. And I get that. But I don't know, there's some deep truth there that you're tapping into, I think.
Something we'll have to mull over a bit and maybe circle back to later. Dan, if you were to say something encouraging to those who the marriage analogy is just really hard for them to receive what's being said, because either they're not in that sort of a relationship, or they have had a failed experience at that relationship. And I don't mean they failed, I'm just saying the relationship failed, or it's unhealthy or unfulfilling, whatever it is. But there are folks out there who this analogy, it's hard for them to push through to see the gold nuggets that are there for them. How would you encourage them to maybe approach this in a way that would be helpful to them?
Yeah, I think what I would say is a couple things in terms of like the value of relationships. If you don't see the value and if you don't see the treasure in these types of relationships, I think at some point you just have to trust that the treasure is there because the scriptures tell us that it's there. And so I would encourage you to consider that. The other thing I'd say is if you've had bad experiences and maybe there's been failed relationships, whether it was your fault or not, join the club. I mean, we all have, and even Jesus did. I mean, you have Jesus who, right. Not only Judas, but like all of his disciples abandoned him when, and so it's like, God knows that relationships sometimes break apart, and yet he does it anyway, and he gets back up and he reconnects with his disciples when he is resurrected, and so that's what I would say is just definitely reflect and learn from past relationships, or do your best to learn. And I would encourage you, like God, just keep trying and look at how God and humanity, God and Israel throughout the whole Old Testament, how many times his covenant or his relationship with his people broke and it failed, and God just keeps at it. And there's that persistence. And you look at like David. Boy, I'm on a roll here. This is a tangent. But no, David, I always think of David, who, the Bible says was a man after God's own heart. And then he does this whole thing with Bathsheba and Bathsheba's husband. And, but, then you have the Psalm 50 where he like repents and he grieves, and he doesn't give up his relationship with God, even though he totally screwed up. And I think that steadfastness, that continual effort, I don't think success is nearly as important as that effort and that continually getting back up and trying again. And so that's what I would say.
That's lovely. Can I add a little something?
Please.
As
yeah,
you
I was
were
hoping.
talking. I think that yes, there's been failure in all of our relationships. There's been brokenness, there's been hurts, there has been anger. I mean, that's humanity. And that's, when you get close to people, that can happen. And so I understand the hesitancy to not even try to go there. However, I would implore you to not give up. But I would say a way in which we can maybe stay in the game is to ensure that we are receiving this kind of relationship from the Lord that he wants to have with us. Because I find it's very hard to pour out from an empty cup. Like we cannot give what we don't have. If we haven't been filled with this relationship with him, it's going to be hard to pour that out to others. And so I would say, then let's just start back at the beginning, right? Like spend that time reflecting on your relationship with the Lord, because it wasn't just a one and done. I said this to a group last night. It's not like he's collecting trophies and he's like, oh yay, Shawna said the prayer and she's good to go. That's a trophy on my shelf. No, his pursuit of us, like Dan was just saying, is never ending. And as good as your relationship with the Lord is, it could be even better, because we're supposed to be continually growing in mutual love and honor and respect with one another, us and the Lord. And so I would say, make sure we're starting there and getting filled with that, so that it becomes a little easier to then pour that out and to receive those kinds of relationships with others. So just a thought that I had that I feel like has been percolating in my brain. And then when you said what you said, Dan, I felt like, oh yeah, maybe I'm on an okay right track there.
Yeah. That's so good. That really is a good word.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, do you know what I'm going to ask you next?
Wasn't that it?
Well, I thought it might
be. Wait a minute.
And then I thought it might be it, but then I added to it. So now bring it back and say, a closing parting thought to the MuseCast audience, because you're good at it, Dan. You'll get it. I know you will.
All right. Well, I'll just say what's been on my mind and my heart this morning.
Okay.
We have a coworker who has been with us for, I think, 25 years, and she is moving on to a different stage in her life, and she's doing something else. And I've loved working with Mary so much, and when I responded to her email, I said, I love how she brings such a enthusiasm and just a fun spirit, and it's just been so steadfast. And so one of the things that it made me think about is, because that really shaped that influences the work culture, and having that steadfast influence in your work culture, that makes a big difference. And so it made me start to ask myself, wait a minute now, what kind of influence are you leaving to the culture that you're in, to your relationships? Are you leaving something that when you leave, it's going to be noticed, or if you leave, is anybody going to even notice that you're gone? I mean, is the culture going to change? Is there going to be a hole to fill at all? And it's a big challenge, because like I not that I want, I don't want to leave a hole to fill, because boy, there goes a great man. I mean, it's nothing like that. It's more a matter of, what's the point of being in a community if you're not like helping that community, if you're not contributing to it? And so that's what I've been thinking about, is what impact, what steadfast, over time, continual thing does my culture or my community depend on me for, and what do I contribute that's unique to me? And I don't know what to do with that at this point, but I think it's a good question to start with. And so I would encourage people to think about that.
I love that, Dan. And you know what? I can tell this has been on your mind, and not just today, because this is also circling back to what you said about Clyde, about a life lived, and not just, living life
complete,
like
not just
life complete, not just living life. And so, I think, hey, we're talking about relationships, we're talking about community, we're talking about how we engage others. And so these are great questions. And I encourage you all to begin to think about that if you haven't already. Because you all are uniquely, beautifully gifted, and your presence and who you are, what you offer to others, is necessary. And so I pray that we can all begin to think through, what is that, and how are we impacting those around us? I think that's a beautiful thought, Dan. Perfect closing to another wonderful show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And by the way, it's Mary Anderson, and we just, we're going to miss her around Woodland Hills, but she's going to continue to do amazing things. So Thank you all for joining. Thank you for emailing in questions. MuseCast@whchurch.org if you ever want to send some questions in. And we will catch you next week when we continue the conversation. Have a great week, everyone.